This is a project I've had for 2.5 years, and I didn't really know what to do with it for the longest time. Ever since I was a child, I've had an idea that our society doesn't really believe in anything. Our culture feels empty. As an Orthodox theologian once said, modern society is divided between a majority who try to numb itself to its meaninglessness, and the few who realize it and then go insane. As a teenager, I realized adults really had no idea what they were doing. Our entire society's worldview was a cardboard box meant to blot out the insanity of the actual world, and now we're in a rainstorm that's melting away the cardboard, but most people prefer to hide inside the box even though they're still getting wet, since they lack the courage to go outside and do anything else. We are a society of people who go through the motions without ever thinking why. We hate those who question this, since we don't have a good answer. This is also why our society is suicidally depressed. If you watch my channel, you'll see me talk about all the issues we have as a culture. As a person on the digital right who is part of the discourse and developments happening in real time, I can see that we live in a historic moment now. The right is forming a new ideology today, and I see that I'm like one of 5 people who could steer this process to be something better. I made this manifesto in this video since I wanted to release my ideas on both how to deal with these issues and also give my best ideas for principles that the right or whatever new ideological coalition in a group I call the not left is going to do. My goal here is to make a message men are willing to die for as the world gets darker. Whether or not I succeed is yet to be seen. It's become clear with recent news that the current in-group is deeply affecting AI for the worse. In contrast, the Boltzmann network emerges a beacon of innovation in decentralized AI by using crypto and blockchain to transform data security, transparency, and scalability. Overcoming the limitations of centralized AI, where privacy and capacity constraints prevail, Boltzmann offers a groundbreaking alternative. Its decentralized web of computing power ensures unlimited scalability, robust data protection, and true transparency. Boltzmann's pioneering encryption will be the future of AI infrastructure for industries like finance and healthcare, while its transparent architecture offers a clear view into a secure, efficient future for individual users. Step into the future with Boltzmann. Join our Telegram at the link below to experience the future of crypto and AI, where privacy meets unlimited potential. Boltzmann Network pioneering a secure, scalable, transparent tomorrow for AI with crypto. Part 1. God is Evolution. God is evolution. That is the underlying principle which drives this thesis. I'm going to start with the simplified version and then go backwards to explain it. For principle, this is an ideology which I would like both atheists and the religious to be able to understand in frameworks that are palatable to them. My perspective is that I'd like to build all this up from easily recognizable assumptions that normal people could agree on. I know the word God triggers a lot of people due to connotations with previous religions. Instead, I'm just going to use the word providence to signify what I mean by God. There is clearly an order to the universe. There are natural laws that operate across the universe and existence. Things like gravity, Darwinistic competition, duality, the mixing of the sexes, or entropy. We take these underlying rules of the universe for granted in our society, yet we don't think about why they exist or not. The universe is a game in which there are clear, immutable rules, yet we ignore them. People are rewarded for following those rules or not. Religion has been an attempt to quantify those rules in simpler ways that can be transmitted to people. We can agree that principles like hard work, humility, bravery, intellectual honesty, or love are good. Furthermore, the natural order rewards them. The societies which follow those principles succeed and continue to propagate, and those who do not collapse. This is the history-long process of the rise and fall of empires, or decadence. The exact form these principles take change between different societies, and that's fine. Different religions exist in different contexts, as they need an individual message tailored to that people. This is similar to how people will have different external decorations inside their homes, which serve the same purpose of beautifying the home, but are also individually good for that person. We assume something must be uniform to be true, but in the same way different societies have different kinds of government tailored to their society, it's also true for religion. The Jews were obsessed with ritual taboos since they needed a strong vetting process to get around the constant external threats their society had. The Aztecs and many other ancient peoples did human sacrifice since it created a psychological process to symbolize the sacrifice their societies would have to make to survive. Different cultures play different roles for the conditions they evolved under. The thing is that all of these organisms, and societies are fundamentally organisms, are pitted in permanent Darwinistic competition with the other. Their role is to figure out what rules to follow, and if they do so correctly, they will succeed and propagate. The West Europeans figured out the scientific method, which happens to relate to objective reality very well, which then let them conquer the world. The Mesopotamians discovered agriculture, which again changed world history. We are born knowing nothing or very little, and different societies act out certain principles to see if it works. Those who follow the correct principles best outcompete those who don't. What this effectively means is that every generation is a challenge by Providence against everyone else playing the game. The thing is that the game is constantly changing, and so it's absurdly difficult to figure out how to win this time. The chariot is what got the Indo-Aryans to conquer the known world, but their descendants after conquering that land needed to learn statecrafts to keep their societies going. The phalanx did very well for the ancient Greeks until their enemies learned to combine cavalry with archers, which should counteract it. In a million ways, each era tries out a hypothesis, pushes it to its natural limitations to see how it works, and then tries something else, and if it fails, it dies. When Plato talked about the natural archetypes, this is the sort of thing he was describing. There is an abstract moral concept of greatness, and the closer a society acts to the standard of greatness, the more it succeeds. There is the duality of the masculine and the feminine, and when we look for romantic partners, we look for the ideal of our opposition rather than any real man or woman, and we see how real men or women fit up to this ideal. For some reason, water with heat or cold will change from liquid to air or solid. These abstract principles exist in a non-material form as effectively ideas, and all material forms must conform to these abstract principles. We completely ignore this and take it for granted, but how can you have a totally materialist worldview and acknowledge these ideals control reality? Like a board game, there are pieces on the board, but those pieces must follow the rules of the game in order for the system to work, but you can't see those rules as material things, yet they control the game. Another factor here is that ideas take on their own life. For example, look at communism. Karl Marx invented communism as an idea. At that point, it became a living thing. In Marx's head, it was a fantasy, but then as it took over nations, the logical contradictions built into communism affected entire civilizations. You could see an idea take on a life of itself, infecting and driving the minds of millions. It struggled as an idea for its own survival. This is why most societies over human history believed in the spirit world. The ancient Greeks would explain this through saying a god or demon possessed the minds of millions, making Stalin or Mao happen. From psychology, we find that people have different sub-personalities which struggle for control of them. Religion is an attempt to instill good spirits or mindsets inside of yourself. This relates to the idea Carl Jung had of the collective subconscious. If you don't like the idea of spirits or demons, just view these as psychological forces. The universe is incredibly mutable. It keeps changing at all times in an infinite amount of ways. It's a constantly twirling hurricane. It's impossible to stop and see everything that's going on. This makes it intensely beautiful and profound. It always offers you more and keeps on challenging you, like the most beautiful and incredible work of art. It keeps on surprising you. Once you think you've cracked it, it throws something else at you. The collapse of all the greatest empires were brought about by the very same factors that made them great. As Aristotle said, and as the genre of tragedy was trying to portray, one's greatest strength will be turned into weakness. The strong state in China or religion in India were those societies' greatest strengths, but also the factors that drove them to stagnation. All rise in turn and then go into decline in natural cycle. The universe universe is a living, breathing process which follows natural cycles, with infinite crashing together at the same moment, creating a beautiful, wonderful mess that is our reality. It's unbelievably incredible that we have the privilege of living with it. The universe is a feedback loop which responds to itself. It's not a sterile machine. You can argue whether or not life is conscious or alive, but it's definitely a responsive system. A disease which is too successful will burn itself out by killing everyone, like a great empire will be killed by its own success. Poverty can create grit which allows you to be successful, while wealth for too long brings moral degeneracy which leads back to poverty. A tsunami creates a crashing wave which knocks into the shore, displacing the pressure. The world simultaneously pushes towards duality and equilibrium, as we'll explain later in this video. Alan Watts said, "Imagine if you were God. The thing with an omnipotent God is that he can do anything. The problem is that if you can do anything, you really can do nothing. Thus, the only thing God could do to avoid boredom is to do everything, since only by doing everything would he not be bored. The answer for why reality exists, and this works for even atheists, is why wouldn't it? Why not? Why not have a brilliant world that's infinitely large and interesting? A decade ago, the modern world felt boring, but now it feels a bit too exciting. Our lives are to struggle. If that were to be the case, what would the world look like? It would appear as if every single generation there was a new crisis. There would be an equilibrium that would constantly push us back towards struggle. Once you got a lot of food, people would breed until you hit scarcity. Once society gets too safe, it falls to degeneracy, so that people have to struggle again. Natural equilibrium pushes us towards struggle every generation. Over history, once people's lives aren't hard enough, they lose meaning, as you can see with decadence, or more abstractly, the Mouse Utopia experiment. This is why I say God is evolution, since for both they push us through struggle to improve. Every era is a challenge by God, or the natural order. Both assess us by objective measurements to see who wins, and then reward those who follow their codes. If you look over evolution, although there are dark ages, backsliding, cruelty, and more, you see evolution has guided us towards higher and more advanced levels. We're not amphibians living in salty tidal pools anymore, or Iron Age tribes living in villages less than 100 people. Providence makes sure that each generation is a struggle, but also that we advance through it. It can appear as if there's no progress, since life has to be pushed back towards survival for the system to work, but the whole system keeps growing. History is a spiral or double helix, like DNA, in which, as I've said many times before, that the spiral turns in on itself and grows more complicated, but you can see the same patterns repeating again and again, although every era of history is still different and unique. The ancient mystery schools believed all of this was God's plan in reproducing himself. To think about it, as you look over evolution, the power of life grows, as does life's mental abilities or level of consciousness. Providence wants to guide us to higher, more godly levels of advancement to be more like him. This is the great chain of being, spoken about in pre-modern philosophy, as some life forms are more advanced, thus more like God, even though all of reality is a reflection of God somehow. There are a couple principles I'd like to work through before I continue. This manifesto is far shorter than I wanted it to be, so I've had to simplify things, but there are several things you must understand about the world or underlying rules, like the laws of physics which explain things. The first being duality. All things to exist must create their opposite. As the first law of physics is, all things must have equivalent counter-reactions. Man must have women. Love must have hate. War, peace, day, night, good or evil. When we don't have the duality, something doesn't exist. Before day, there wasn't night, merely void. We took having breathable air for granted before we went into space. People ask why God would make a world with cruelty. The thing is that there must be an equal force to drag us down for good to fight against. The devil exists since there must be balance here. Keep in mind the universe is designed to be interesting and difficult. Good must fight evil to grow strong. stronger. To explain this in non-religious terms, there is entropy. Entropy is the force of natural chaos. The example from physics is that when you break a ceramic plate, you can't put it back together. You couldn't put the Roman Empire back together after it fell, although Justinian tried. From the Big Bang has been a gradual breakdown from the original unity. Physicists believe that the world has been getting more chaotic since the dawn of time. We see this in that anything that isn't maintained, whether a nation, house, physical health, or a human relationship, will fall apart without effort. Everything collapses in entropy without effort against it. The irony is that the duality to entropy is that you've gradually seen incredible advance and growth in complexity over the universe's history occurring at the exact same time. Planets and suns have formed. Life, civilizations, art, or philosophy. Order and chaos both grow in power at the same time, playing into each other in the same process. As physics says, every reaction has an equal counter-reaction. This is good and evil, God and Satan. Satan is symbolically that which pushes for entropy, and God that which pushes for order and growth. This is a process integral to the universe itself, which existed for billions of years before humans, but which human life fits inside the archetype. Alongside this, people can put out higher or lower frequencies. Communism is an ideology which propounded low frequencies as it created disorder and failed. Communist societies consumed all the social institutions of their previous societies, leading to chaos. Liberalism pushed order, albeit ironically indirectly, resulting in more advancement. Individuals can do this as well. A good principal in a school will result in the students thriving and learning more, creating a compounding spiral to improve those students' lives in general who improve others, while an evil principle will have the opposite effect. We all choose whether we serve order or entropy. We can gradually build the outside world in our image, as for example, a society structures its architecture or political systems based off its subconscious. We are all constantly projecting our internal life to the outside world. We are all like radio towers who project ourselves across the universe. America as a country, or Billy Joel, have been very successful projectors in that they spread their essence around the world so that it changes others. As individuals, we're an accumulation of that alongside everything else that's projecting around us. Our world is created by these different ripples spreading outwards. All things want to propagate their ripple as much as possible. An easiest example of this is the sun, which propels energy around the universe, which in turn has allowed the creation of life, all built upon the sun's projections. All things exist within the great chain of being, from higher to lower forms. The higher forms are realer than the lower forms. They all exist together as all things are connected into a universal whole. There are cells in our body which exist to serve us, but these cells also have their own existence. We as humans are cells inside our nations or cultures. Those are in turn cells in Earth's biosphere, which is a cell to the solar system and then universe. If Earth died, it would cancel all the nations and humans, thus Earth is realer. We have to recognize our place inside of this. Depression and suicide comes from separation. From studies and just from the general historic wisdom, we've found that people feel happiest when they know they belong, when they have communities, when they have beauty around them, have a value system that tells them what their place is and where they belong. Most religions exist to remove the barrier between people and the universe, to feel at one with everything else. Once you realize you're part of a web of existence, you can stop worrying, since you know even if you die, you belong to something greater. In fact, we're made up of particles from existence, with consciousness being an illusion of our separation from the rest of the universe. Part 2, the Consciousness Project. We don't have much control over the things that happen to us in our lives in a lot of cases. We do to a certain degree, but you could be born a slave. Your nation exists next to a much larger neighbor who can conquer you without you being able to possibly defeat them. If you're a peasant in Uganda, you're not going to become a venture capital mogul, and expecting you to do so is just insane. Furthermore, if someone is born in a position of immense privilege, like wealth or power, it's not right for us to judge them for something that came about from the chance of their birth. And even being born in those bizarre conditions, they should know what is right. This is something our society actually does struggle with, which shocks me since when I was younger, and I'm 22, so I'm still really young, we took completely for granted, which I thought was a stable assumption. That being said, our society has created an artificial racial caste system in which your moral level, hiring, or social advancement is determined from birth based off how oppressed your racial or sexual caste is. I can't believe we did this, since I think if polled, the vast majority of the Western world is going to agree that this isn't what any of us wanted, but a small group of radicals pushed it and gained dominance. This leads to the second point. The human mind tries to avoid two things at all costs, those being responsibility and powerlessness. Although this happens subconsciously and is very hard to avoid, our goal is to try to develop a system by which people stop stressing about that which they have no power over, while also taking responsibility for that which they can. If you look at the history of humanity as an attempt to abdicate responsibility or avoid powerlessness in a myriad of ways, you realize that there is a very dark side of our human condition, one that is preventable. That being said, this is why we judge people for their birth, not their actions. The thing is that you can perfectly correlate the wealth of a society with how much it values individual responsibility. When you look at the success of Western civilization, a big reason for it is that the West created the individual. In previous societies, you were part of a clan which dominated your whole life, determining your work, who you were married to, and take your money when you succeeded. What capitalism is the creation of a system by which someone was assessed for their personal level of productivity. The state in turn mooches off individual productivity, sublimating it to the group. Once you see the left as a move to abdicate responsibility, everything else makes sense. When you see how the left's goal is to be responsible for nothing by having the state take care of you for your entire life. If anyone succeeds, they're bad and should be torn down by society. You can never be judged for failing. This is the great evil of the left, in that it tears down the great out of envy. Our goal here is to make a society where people don't feel stressed for things which they can't control. They are trained from childhood to do this, to make it part of their automatic subconscious. There are multiple ways of doing this, but EMDR and cognitive behavioral therapy are both methods that can rewire the subconscious, and I think society should use these liberally alongside other psychological methods. My goal is to create a society where people are constantly improving their subconscious and developing them with groups. Perhaps using psychedelics like ayahuasca, the hemisync methods developed by the Monroe Institute, or anything else that works that can help get us in touch with our subconscious or the spirit world, whatever you want to call it, so that we can share our discoveries to learn more about ourselves and the world. To put a focus upon the human experience and what the subjective experience of life is as a person. The modern world feels very empty and cold. We live in a giant machine whose sole purpose is to extract human effort for greater productivity. What we stand for is a society which puts the human soul and spirit at the center. A society which prioritizes beauty, the soul, tradition, the divine, and the other deep, profound things that we're willing to die for. The construction of these factory mass-produced homes, or this crappy modern art, are both sins against the soul, which I will not abide by. The thing is that the development of the soul of our society is a shared process that I want us to all work on, so the final aim is something I myself might not understand. We also aim to put individual responsibility at the aim of society. Over history, the twin tyrannies of culture and government have torn the individual down. In most societies, the individual exists to serve the propagation of the society. Irrational and stupid superstitions grow, while the forces of envy and ignorance tear down greatness. In this message, everything that we determine is not under our control is not our responsibility. Every single process in society should be someone's responsibility so that no one can slack. This also involves the weakening or removal of organizations which are not based upon individual responsibility, like bureaucracies. Everything should be made to compete with everything else for survival. Organizations that don't do this always grow, bloat, become leeches on society that try to consume the organizations that are competitive. Furthermore, as much of society as possible should be based upon reciprocal relationships done for mutual benefit, rather than forcing people to do do things through physical strength or motivating them through false lies. The dominant value here is honor. Honor is a value which results in people maintaining their responsibilities. If a man does not do his duty, he is dishonored and socially shamed. Honor is a value lost in our society. It's a strong value, unlike the passive kindness that we prioritize instead. A kind man tolerates evil since he is too weak to do otherwise. The honorable uphold strong values even when it costs them, or is difficult since they know it's right. Honor is a hard and difficult value which allows you to hold yourself and others to abstract standards. Most people are nice or kind, but very few are virtuous, and they will maintain their values when it's not directly in their self-interest. That leads me to an important point. That being the role of this movement is to increase the level of consciousness. The thing is that since we can't control our circumstances, what we do is make a society which is wiser, more intelligent, more holy, kind, honest, brave, or creative. We can expand the level of consciousness of our society so that we can all face all kinds of threats better. Over history, once societies get safer, wealthier, or more comfortable, they also get weaker and experience decline. This has been going on for millennia and is currently occurring in our society. We can continue to exist in this cycle in which as we grow wealthier, we also then crash harder. Without other impetus, this cycle is slated to just get more intense each time. That being said, there is a way to break out of this cycle of addiction we see with the rise and fall of societies. I'm not saying life will get easier, but it will get more tolerable and better to manage. If we have good values and follow these principles of using honor to be responsible for that which we can control and not worrying about that which we can't, then we can handle these cycles. By making a society which is brave, honorable, strong, intelligent, generous, and more, we can handle the worst and positive aspects of these cycles. It makes everything easier. Furthermore, you can't really control the material world around you, but you can control your attitudes to it. You may lose all your possessions, but no matter what, you can maintain your wisdom. Historians have been saying for as long as we've had records that societies which have the values mentioned above are those who succeed. Empires on the rise are brave, moralistic, inquisitive, and tough. Those in decline are lazy, arrogant, entitled, and cowardly. Thus, rather than our society which optimizes for material comfort, we should instead push for those moral qualities first, and then the material rewards will come afterwards. The human mind has differing levels of consciousness. This is something Ken Wilber writes about, and my friend Homath speaks about in great detail. I also cover it in my video on emotions. Imagine if you gave a Bronze Age society, like Egypt or the Hittites, nukes. They would immediately use it to blow up all their opponents. That being said, America did not do this with the Soviets. This shows partly that societies can become more mature over history, in the same manner that individuals can as they grow up. Furthermore, that a society's level of maturity determines their level of advancement. Once they stop being mature, their society collapses. Thus, we must maintain our standards for society to advance. The natural order has different levels, and societies which pass certain tests or standards are allowed to progress to the next level, but can also backslide at any time. Different levels of consciousness can include how, with, for example, the discovery of the New World religions, people suddenly understood the Golden Rule, or treat others as you would like to be treated. Alternately, the Enlightenment let us see the world with abstract logical principles. Christianity created a concept of the abstract truth. With each of these, the physical world remained the same, but mankind reached a new level of consciousness, which allowed us to unlock a new level. In the esoteric tradition, as we further our consciousness, we grow closer to providence. God is meant to be pure thought, and as our spiritual or intellectual abilities grow, we grow closer to the power and wisdom of God. The wisdom, or as tribal peoples call it, magical systems, that is science, allowed us great power. The ancients would view science as a very effective form of magic. Our goal is through responsibility or honor to help further humanity in this role of developing our consciousness. We humans are often pushed back into poverty, but if we can develop our minds, characters, or souls, we can keep those across 1,000 hard situations. A final point I want to make before we move on: the most important thing is the truth. The truth unlocks the rest. As St. Augustine said, it is a lion which, when left in an arena, will fight for itself. The belief in truth has unlocked the great greatest revolution in human history. That being said, most human societies have not believed in the truth over history, and even a lot of the West doesn't today. They believe in subjective truths, or whatever you want to believe is true. When the truth is obscured, it justifies the greatest cruelties and corruptions. The truth must be maintained at all costs. It is a message worth dying for that I would happily give my life for. Two things I'd like to get across before we move on to the next section. The first is that this message is not meant to fight or be in contradiction with any of the major world religions. I'm a Christian, for example, and this message doesn't get in the way of Christianity, but hopefully, like the Enlightenment or Stoicism or some other code like that, it can act in addition to things our society hasn't been able to deal with. And I have profound respect for every major world religion, which I think in their own ways are reflection of the truth. The second and final point is that we have reached the endpoint in which shaming or guilting is effective, where our society tries to motivate entirely through negative emotion, in which we repress things we don't like, such as sex or the disgusting barbaric parts of human nature, like liking war or torture and that sort of thing. But we need to move past it because, for example, over the course of the 20th century, when we tried to repress this, it just bubbled up with the horrifying world wars. And our society is seeing such horrible aspects of human nature because we are over-socialized and repressed ourselves. And so instead, we have to move past these limitations and realize that each aspect of human nature, no matter how negative, does have a purpose, and we should honor that purpose and through that be able to transcend it. With sex, for example, we understand that there is an important value for sex, but a person who is driven purely by it will go mad because there are higher things, and it is our duty to go through the lower forms and not repress them, but be able to conquer them and move past them. The irony, though, is that our society actively hates consciousness. And you can see this in either normie consumerism or the left, in that we make fun of people who try to think about the big questions of what life means, and we actively dismiss those who study history or the world or want to further their spiritual sensitivity and connection to the divine, in that we want everyone to be a cog who follows the political commissars and consumes and works, while we hate people who do otherwise. But I think we can all agree that this is a recipe for disaster. Part 3, freedom. I think most societies in history could get behind the goal of furthering consciousness, which is why they had religion. That being said, I think Western civilization has a great gift which is threatened with destruction now, that being freedom. I believe each major civilization has developed a great moral truth, or maybe multiple, some examples of which I have here in this text wall. The West developed freedom. That being said, freedom is dependent upon honor and individual responsibility, since a free man is one who is responsible for himself. We exist in a real hinge moment in history. This is since there are so many new technologies in development now. The Industrial Revolution in real terms is still very recent, and we developed atomic technology within living memory. That being said, we stand on the verge of godlike technology with artificial intelligence or genetic engineering. The problem, though, is that we are one of the least wise societies ever in history, and so we are toddlers with the power of gods. What do we do with that? I stand for individual freedoms as I think it pushes against the two greatest threats to our civilization which we face today. It's very hard to predict the future, and most people are incorrect, but I'll be very surprised if one of these two things doesn't happen, partly since these are two very normal things over history which we see repeated again and again as being two sides of the same duality. Those are degeneracy and the slide back into barbarism, or state overreach, and tyranny, both of which threaten us on an industrial scale now. The second worry is state overreach. Some of you might have seen my video on Mouse Utopia, in which I've talked about the potential for civilizational collapse due to degeneracy and moral collapse. Even if it doesn't look like that, this sort of decadence has happened countless times over history in different civilizations. The worry, though, is does the greater level of wealth result in a greater level of degeneracy? The second worry is state overreach, which has the potential to reach horrifying new levels due to technology. The government or the powerful will soon have the ability to genetically engineer the populace to be cattle, to monitor them every day with AI or cameras, to use military technology to kill dissenters. Perhaps technology will also turn the balance towards decentralization, which is something I'm also seeing, but I worry about, with technology, the death of the human soul, either through genetic engineering or cybernetics. Our society has no concept of the soul or the sacred, thus I'm worried about our elite making decisions based out of economics or power politics, practically thinking that in exchange for turning humans into efficient, soulless robots, we as a society, or really, they can get wealthier. This is why I'm releasing this message now. The thing is, a free man is able to combine both the strengths and weaknesses of order and chaos, or degeneracy and political overreach, in that a free competitive society is one which internalizes chaos and competition inside of itself to allow greater order and greater outcomes. A free man is one who is capable of handling chaos in his private life, thus it makes him stronger, so he can face both degeneracy and tyranny. I am making a stand now, and those who wish may also stand with me. This is a stand for the human soul through honor, freedom, and truth to die for these things. Again, our platform is honor, freedom, and truth. We stand against degeneracy, lies, and tyranny. To not surrender an inch to those who would take them from us. This is not a message of peace. We need to fight for these to survive. The evil are willing to fight, and so must the good. It's not going to be easy, but when all's said and done, we don't really have a choice since we're stuck in a world of suffering. If this is a message that people are willing to sacrifice themselves against degeneracy, lies, and tyranny, I win. Our society is lacking in any virility, masculinity, discipline, courage, standards, soul, or anything worth dying for. We are a society that's weak, boring, tired, and is losing the will to continue. I would like to throw in a message of those who want to be hard, who want strength, who want glory, who want duty, those where the plastic nature of our world is unbearable. We can do this in a handful of ways. The first is by maintaining strength even in comfortable situations. It is your duty to make yourself as strong as possible. Do hard things, face uncomfortable realities, struggle, achieve, be in pain, push yourself. Only by struggling will you be capable of handling how difficult the world is. The system wants you to be kind and complacent so they can manipulate you, not to be strong and virtuous. Every position must be argued to death. We must have a society in which every single point has to be logically defended in the marketplace of ideas. The second thing is that we need to separate power. This is the thing I feel most strongly about. This is why I care about individual liberty. If you have a free, well-armed populace, the government can't oppress them. If you have capitalism, you can't have oppressive monopolies, and religious freedom means no oppressive churches. If you have local power, the strong governments can't oppress the people. We need to decentralize power if we want to survive the coming technological crisis. The American emperor can't demand everyone has chip implants, which turn them into slaves if power is localized. Furthermore, when you look at societies which are disempowered with an emperor controlling everything, it results in indolent and servile populations alongside tyrannical and effeminate leaders. I think the best thing America did was break out of this cycle, and if we lose it, the whole world will slide backwards. I think the most important thing is that we don't allow this by sliding back into tyranny. Tyranny is so much more capable with new technology that we can't afford it. In summary, we stand for honor, freedom, and truth against degeneracy, lies, and tyranny. Are you with me? We stand at a historic moment where we can choose a better fate as the future hangs in the balance. We know what we must do, but will we do it? Are you ready?